From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Chile's Interior Minister Andrés Chadwick is in Parliament being questioned for the death of Mapuche Camilo Catrillanca. Indigenous lawmaker Emilia Nayudu is expected to question Chadwick on the details surrounding Catrillanca's murder. The young Mapuche man was killed on November 14 by security forces, sparking outrage and several protests. On Monday, a court revoked the preventive detention of 2 police officers accused of taking part in the killing. Our correspondent in Santiago, Paula Dragnik, brings us more.
The Interior Minister Andrés Chadwick is appearing in Congress to be questioned regarding the behavior of the police forces, also known as carabineros, and particularly that of the Jungle Command in the community of Temucucuy, where Mapuche member Camilo Catrillanca was killed. He is the 16th Mapuche murder in Chile since the return to democracy. This Tuesday, the Interior Minister will be questioned by the Mapuche lawmaker Emilia Nayudu, that has planned to start the round of questions with an introduction in the Mapuche language, something that has spread great expectations not only among lawmakers, but also among human rights organizations that have arrived to the Parliament to listen to her questions.
Otto Sonnenholzner has been chosen as Ecuador's new vice president. The National Assembly chose him with 94 votes in favor. Out of 128 assembly members, there were 27 against and 7 abstentions. Sonnenholzner is a well-known radio presenter from Guayaquil. He has no formal links to any political party. However, several figures from Ecuador's traditional right-wing parties have expressed support for him. Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, has the details.
Hello, good morning. We are at the National Assembly where the plenary session just finished, and now Otto Sonnenholzner was elected by the National Assembly as the new Vice President of Ecuador with 90 votes in favor. Otto Sonnenholzner was elected as the new Vice President of Ecuador. Also, the Citizen Revolution Movement rejected the list, and also they voted against the new Vice President of Ecuador. Now, Elizabeth Cabezas appointed him as the new vice president, despite Moreno is not now in the country. It's all for now. Back to you at the studios.
Thank you, Denise, for that report. A court in Argentina has handed out prison sentences to 2 former FOR executives for their part in the dirty war conducted by the military dictatorship. Hector Sibila, who was a FOR security manager, and 1 other executive were found guilty of handing over trade union activists who were then tortured by the military. The case has thrown light on the support given by multinational companies to Argentina's military dictatorship. Students continue to protest across France the day after President Emmanuel Macron announced concessions to the Yellow Vest movement. Hundreds of high school students have marched in Paris against education reforms. These reforms include changes to the university admissions system. The students are angry that their concerns are not being addressed. High school students have also protested in the south of the country. In the city of Montpellier, young people staged a performance to denounce the detention of dozens of fellow students. Hundreds of students have also rallied in Marseille. And Yellow Vest protests continue this Tuesday. The movement is still active despite President Macron's statement on Monday. They say the measures proposed by the French president are not enough.
The measures that Emmanuel Macron announced are from an economic world of the past, and the Yellow Vests want a new world, one that is closer to humanity.
Our correspondent in Paris, Sergio Rodrigo, tells us more.
Protests continue in France after President Emmanuel Macron gave a televised speech on Monday night. More than 20 million people turned in for the 30-minute national address to offer an increase in the minimum wage and other reforms in an attempt to benefit the workers. But the Yellow Vest movement said this is not enough. This Tuesday, high school students gathered in different areas of Paris to protest, and several others around the country to show their support to the Yellow Vest protests. Other movements are also joining the marches to urge Emmanuel Macron and his government to step back from the education reform. Protests will continue and blockades are also planned. There is an assembly scheduled here in Paris to decide how to continue with the protest. So far, trade unions have already called for more protests on December 14, as they are not satisfied with the proposal made by the government so far. Also on December 15, the Yellow Vests have called for the 5th demonstration event in the Champs-Élysées, where a massive attendance is expected.
That was Sergio Rodrigo from France. The British Prime Minister Theresa May is touring European capitals in a desperate effort to win concessions and save her Brexit deal. May arrived in Berlin a day after she postponed a vote in the British Parliament because it was clear the deal will be rejected. There was an awkward moment when the car door got stuck and she couldn't get out to shake hands with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Earlier, May was in the Netherlands to meet the Prime Minister Mark Rutte. May wants reassurances over the so-called Irish backstop, a part of the agreement designed to prevent a hard border between the north and south of Ireland. Many of her own members of Parliament fear this could trap the United Kingdom indefinitely under EU trade rules. However, a string of European diplomats say the deal cannot be renegotiated.
There is no room whatsoever for renegotiation. But, of course, there is room, if used intelligently, is room enough to give further clarifications and further interpretations without opening the withdrawal agreement. This will not happen. Everyone has to know that the withdrawal agreement will not be reopened.
The British government has announced that its Brexit deal will be brought back for a vote in Parliament by the 21st of January. However, some opposition members, including the Scottish Nationalist Party, are pushing for an immediate vote of not confidence in the Prime Minister. The Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, says he will call for such a vote at the right time.
This is no longer a functioning government, and the Prime Minister must admit her deal is dead. Her shambolic negotiations have ended in failure, and she no longer has the authority to negotiate for this country when she doesn't even have the authority of her own party. I've tabled this motion today, which the members supported the tabling of. We have no confidence in this government. We need to do the appropriate thing at the appropriate time to have a motion of no confidence in order to get rid of this government.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. Pro-immigration groups have protested at the border between Mexico and the United States. The activists gathered in a California beach near the fence separating both countries to protest the migration policies pushed by President Donald Trump. And at the U.S. side of the border, dozens of leaders from different faiths were arrested over the weekend as they gathered there to show their support for migrants. The group say they brought together some 200 faith and indigenous leaders who represented diverse faiths, including Christian, Jewish, and Muslim. U.S. President Donald Trump say he's more than willing to take the blame for a partial government shutdown if he can reach a deal with Democrats to fund his border wall. He said his long-promised U.S.-Mexico barrier will be built one way or the other. Trump was speaking at the White House meeting where he clashed with Democratic leaders Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer.
You know what I'll say? Yes. If we don't get what we want, one way or the other, whether it's through you, through a military, through anything you want to call, I will shut down the government.
Okay,
absolutely.
fair enough.
And
We
I am
disagree.
proud, and I'll
We
tell you what,
disagree.
I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck, because the people of this country don't want criminals and people that have lots of problems and drugs pouring into our country. So I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it.
Our correspondent Pablo Perez brings us the latest from the border.
We're at a place called Otay Mesa. This is near Tijuana on the Mexican state of Baja California, bordering the southern state of California of the United States. And to this point is where the some representatives of the migrant caravan are headed. In a few minutes they will arrive because there behind me there's the United States General Consulate, and the migrants, the Central Americans, are going to deliver a letter to the North American consul here, and they are attempting to ease their process for the ones that are asking for refugee or political asylum in the United States. That's something that has been very difficult lately because of the policies of the Donald Trump government that has lowered the number of applicants up to 30 a day when they usually were processing 100 or even more daily. Now they're only processing 30, and that's insufficient because there's not only the migrants, the Central American migrants, but there's also a lot of people applying for the refugee status here in Tijuana, people coming from all over the world. There are Russians, there are Africans, people from India that are trying to get into the United States through this entry port. So the migrants some of them are trying to do this in the legal way, but there's another way that is crossing to the United States and getting detained by the Border Patrol and then asking them, after turning themselves over, asking them to the authorities for the initiation of their refugee application. The CBP, the California Border Patrol, has said that over the last weeks they have detained over 2,000 Central Americans. That's a rise on the number of the people that is crossing illegally through the desert, walking through the desert, or aided by what they call coyotes. That's the people that charge for crossing the border illegally. And that surge on illegal crossing has been registered not only here in the border between Baja California and California, but all over the border between Mexico and the United States. That's indicating, according to certain analysts, that the migration itself is growing, and not only because it's not only shown on the migrant caravan, but on a surge all over the border.
The brother of the president of Honduras is facing a trial this Tuesday under allegations of drug trafficking. Juan Antonio, brother of Juan Orlando Hernandez, is accused of smuggling drugs from Colombia and Mexico into the United States in 2004. His attorney says he will pledge not guilty in a court in New York. The former congressman was arrested on November 23. Brazilian police have raided properties of the senator and former presidential candidate Aécio Neves after corruption accusations. Neves is suspected of money laundering and bribe-taking. He was a presidential candidate in 2014 and was defeated by Dilma Rousseff in the second round. Neves was among the senators who backed the impeachment of Rousseff. Now to Paraguay, where social organizations from both the city and rural areas march in Asunción to demand respect for human rights. They say the state persecutes social and campesino leaders and criminalizes their struggles for land.
Urban workers, campesinos, and students are demanding that the government of Paraguay guarantees human rights. The student movement has made ardent demands for education in a system that no longer guarantees a completely free education.
All human rights, mainly education, should be a guarantee by a state. Today we are once again making a call for public policies to comply with our rights. This is included in the demands that each organization has here, as we need to be heard because there is proof and evidence that we are not being heard. and that the government has reached our rights.
Paraguay's Human Rights Coordinator revealed in its last report that 4 out of 10 children in the country live in poverty. Organizations of working children also march for human rights and for the continued struggle for a dignified life.
Today we shout, people. Today for us. Today is our day. We have to celebrate this day. We have to commemorate and continue to fight so that we can have our rights fulfilled.
For these workers, the government hasn't guaranteed union rights. Collective bargaining rights are virtually absent from the country. According to the last report on human rights in Paraguay, the Ministry of Labor has only 26 inspectors to verify whether or not 240,000 registered companies are complying with the workers' rights.
In our country, all of the existing labor rights continue to be violated, starting with the denial of our right to freely associate in a union and the persecution of workers. We don't have the right to hold strikes.
Campesino organizations also emphasize that in the fight for land and agrarian reform, activist murders have continued. One example is the murder of campesino leader Maria Esther Riveros this year. They say that despite this, they will continue to defend and conquering their rights.
The world marked the 70th anniversary of the UN Declaration on Human Rights. Free Lula events around Brazil called for the former president's freedom. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Mir, brings us more.
Last night, on December 10th, in honor of the 70th anniversary of the UN Declaration on Human Rights, a series of events were held across Brazil demanding freedom for ex-President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who was arrested last April with no material evidence by a judge, Sergio Moro, who's now accepted a cabinet position in the far-right government of Jair Bolsonaro. During an event in the ABC Metallurgical Union headquarters in São Bernardo do Campo in São Paulo, guests from left political parties from across Latin America and Europe gave speeches talking about human rights and demanding freedom for the ex-president. And at the end of this event, they read a letter by Lula that he wrote from behind bars for the crowd. In this letter, Lula said that he refuses to exchange his dignity for freedom. And he finished the letter saying that he knows that although there are many setbacks going on in Brazil and across the world in terms of human rights, he knows that the cause of human rights is going to continue to march forward. And he called on all people who care about human rights to fight for democracy. In Sao Paulo, this is Brian Mir, reporting for Telesur.
Thank you, Brian, for that report. In Colombia, victims of the armed conflict have celebrated the International Human Rights Day with an art exhibition. The groups of victims created different pieces of clothing with colorful fabrics to narrate their experiences during the armed conflict. They are now demanding truth and justice and that there is never another armed conflict. The names of more than 200 murdered social leaders were also featured on the clothing.
On this canvas, we're making a public denunciation, a way to narrate our story, restoring our social memory through art.
A 1,000-year-old Chilean forest of Araucarias tree is in danger of extinction. Reaching heights of up to 60 meters tall and 3 in diameter, the trees are national monuments, but the population is dropping due to climate change, fires, and massive cultivations of pine nuts, considered a gourmet product. Indigenous Pehuenches people are fighting for the forest preservation. More news in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. In Tunisia, the National Coalition has launched a new political front. The party has gathered the basis of the Nira Tunes movement while bringing together new progressive forces.
The National Coalition was born of the Nira Tunes political party, a bloc led by Prime Minister Youssouf al-Shahed. This political party has conducted several surveys, this in a bid to launch a new political party open to new progressive forces.
The Prime Minister and members of the government are at the forefront of this project. Congress representatives are also supporting our project.
The National Coalition was once the main ally of the Al-Nashara movement, but now it seems destined to become its main adversary. The coalition is looking towards a new era of politics, but that could be brought to a halt by the Al-Nashra movement.
The coalition's battle with the Al-Nahda movement will be decisive, although this battle will be just a partial one, since the real battle involves the chief of state.
The National Coalition announced the objectives just before launching its project, which seeks to offer a fresh political option.
Israeli occupation forces continue their attacks on Palestinians in attempts to force evictions from their territories. Our correspondent Malak Khaled reports.
The occupation forces, just a few steps away from the border with occupied Palestine, hasn't shifted from their ordinary activities. Here, at the Lebanese side of the border, early in the morning, the Israeli army has discovered an alleged network of tunnels that connect Lebanon with the occupied Palestine.
Indeed, there is a tunnel, but this has no relevance on this border. I mean, they do this to calm Israeli citizens, but how do they do it? If afterwards they check and there are more tunnels, hundreds of tunnels in Lebanon or Gaza, this provokes fears in the Israeli people. It can make them return to their previous home countries.
Israeli forces spent hours checking and searching for holes that connect the tunnels. Meanwhile, on the other side of the border, the Lebanese army confirms the stability of the area as the United Nations forces operating in southern Lebanon do. It is confirmed that there is not anything to worry about at that moment in the occupied Valley Hula, or even in the colony of Al-Mutla, nearby the village of Farkila, the alleged initial point where the tunnels allegedly begin. Even the Israeli media recognized that no special instructions were given to residents of the north of occupied Palestine.
As you can see, this is quite common for us. We are used to this kind of provocation on our border. Actually, this wall was built to calm settlers, but it seems that they are even more afraid now.
There is a stark contrast between the silence in the occupied Palestine and the location where searches have taken place and where Lebanese neighbors have mocked the occupied forces. The so-called Northern Shield is perceived by the Lebanese side as a failed test given the indifference and lack of concern by Lebanese people despite the Israeli threats. They continue to trust in the Palestinian resistance.
In a new incident, Israeli troops have killed a Palestinian man on suspicion of car ramming. Israeli forces opened fire at the man after his car hit a police vehicle in the West Bank. In a separate case, another Palestinian driver was arrested. The incidents come as Israeli troops are searching for suspects who shot and wounded 7 Israelis outside a Jewish settlement earlier this week. Still in Palestine, Israeli forces have injured protesters in the Gaza Strip. Our correspondent in the Middle East, Nayara Tardo, tells us more.
Al menos 24 palestinos, entre ellos...
At least 24 Palestinians, including a paramedic, were injured in the 19th Great March of Return in the Gaza Strip. Local media said Israeli warboats shot at protesters and also attacked them with tear gas. Fishermen organizations said that Israeli forces attacked Palestinian boats in the north of the city of Rafah. Israel imposed a limit of 3 nautical miles in the coast of Gaza Strip. In the last few years, Israeli troops have performed more than 100 attacks against Palestinian boats and arrested hundreds of Palestinian fishermen. Those clashes peaked around May 14, 2018, right before the 70th anniversary of the Nakba Day, also known as the Day of the Palestinian Catastrophe. This year, the day coincided with the transfer of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
At least 4 people have been killed and other 6 injured in a suicide bomb attack in Afghanistan. The suicide bomber targeted a military convoy outside the Afghan capital, Kabul. The blast occurred when the convoy was coming back from overnight operations. The Taliban has claimed responsibility for the attack. And with this, we come to the end of this news brief. This and many other stories you can find at our website at telestorenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telestory English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.